There's a power source here that's remarkable. And I wanted to say this, and I'm going to say this really briefly, and I'm going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes on step 8 and 9 and turn it over to Mari, hopefully. One of the things I didn't understand is how to demonstrate what I'm talking about here. What does it look like? You know, when Wilson first wrote the original version of the 12 steps, he didn't, in step 6, he used the word willing. We're entirely willing. What would it look, what's a guy look like that's entirely willing to have God remove fill in the blank? And what I started realizing with working with newcomers is that the new guys that showed up and took the actions of someone who was demonstrating a willingness to have the obsession to drink removed, it was removed. And the ones that just kind of didn't take those actions, it didn't seem to be removed. When I looked at my own, you know, I was a guy who tried time and time again not to drink, swore to myself, and I'd always go back to it. And in 1978, what I did different was I started demonstrating a willingness consistently and persistently in my life. I had a lot of problems when I got sober, but one thing that was so evident from my actions, if you'd have watched me, you would have at least said, Bob's pretty screwed up, but my God, he sure looks like he's willing. Because I was going to 2 meetings a day. I'm calling my sponsor. I got commitments. I got jobs in AA. I'm even praying when I don't believe in God yet. I'm making amends. I'm doing all this stuff. And if you'd have looked at, and I realized that the same thing is true with all defects of character. And as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've gotten free of so many things that had their hooks into me. Sugar, gambling, some sex stuff, some gossip stuff that was brutal. Stock market. I was insane with the stock. Just if you were here last year, I was addicted to Diet Coke and Pepsi Max. Diet Coke wasn't enough. I had to do Pepsi Max, which is the crack cocaine of diet soda. And I was drinking 6, 8 of them a day, the big ones. And I knew that because of the artificial sweetener and the high level of caffeine in there, because it was twice that of regular diet soda, I knew that this is not good for me. And it took me probably 3 months of daily prayer before God took the hook out. And why did he take it out? Why didn't he just take it like this? I guess because I had to demonstrate. I had to position myself as if I meant it to catch the grace. And and the hard thing about that for me is I have a short attention span. I don't want to persist, right? And the only reason I persisted when I got new sober is I was dying. I was dying of alcoholism. And sometimes you get to a point, and I'll tell you, there's a tremendous security in knowing that if I can persist and continue to act like I'm willing to have God remove something, that in every single case so far, without exception, in time he does. But it's funny, sometimes you don't know when it's gone. Or all of a sudden you're in a situation where you used to like to talk crap about people and you realize, I don't want to do that. Or you find yourself in a situation that you would have caved and done something years ago that you would have felt bad about, and now you're not doing it. And you don't know the moment sometimes of the change. But yet you persist with the actions and you become different slowly. I think it's often the way God's grace works is similar to, back in the 70s, we had this type of marijuana called creeper pot. And you didn't know it was creeper pot until when you bought it. It looked like really good marijuana, and you'd buy this marijuana and you'd go home with this lid and you'd smoke the crap out of it and nothing would happen. And you knew you got ripped off, so you'd be pissed. Now you're on your way back to the guy you bought it from to rough him up because he's ripped you off, and you get about halfway there, and the next thing you know, you're sitting on the curb watching the colors, and you don't even know when it hits you. All of it just creeps up on you, right? Slowly. And Alcoholics Anonymous is kind of like that. And one day you're in a situation that you've been in many times before, and you always took the bad road, the selfish road, and you find yourself doing something different. And you know the truth. That's not you. Something's happened. Something's happened. One of the things that scared me the most was step 8 and 9. I remember sitting in meetings and I remember listening to this one self-righteous guy. I was pretty new, and he's like, yeah, and I paid. You're not worth anything until you pay back every single dime. I paid back every single dime I ever owed or stole. And I was sitting there going, oh, no. That ain't going to happen. It's too big. I mean, I wasn't a big thief. I was a petty thief. I was a guy who every single day of my life for years and years stole something. It might have been just walking down the street. I was an opportunist. If there was a car unlocked, I'd steal the 8-track player. That dates me a little bit, that was in there, right? And that's if I could sell it, right? I was the guy in the bar that I'd run out of money, and if you went to the bathroom while you're gone, I would steal your change and drink your drink and move to a different part of the bar. And I'd do that till I got too sloppy and get caught. I was just probably twice a day, at least once a day for years, I had this scam that I played. You know, you got to picture, I looked bad. I had long hair, and I was dirty, and I had a long beard, and kind of grufty looking, you know, not the kind of person you'd want in your restaurant or gas station, you know. And I'd go in and I'd pretend like I was putting money in a cigarette machine, and then I'd just start like a crazy person screaming and yelling and banging on the machine, you ripped me off, until the manager would just want to get me out of there, and he'd open the machine and give me a pack of cigarettes. I did that probably once or twice a day for years. I don't think I ever worked anywhere where if there was something to steal, I didn't steal it. I mean, my parents, I owed them so much money that it was like a lifetime. I'd ripped off, I had drug dealers that had liked me and fronted me stuff. And, well, you can't front me stuff because I become my only customer. I mean, you know, right? I owed everybody, and I'm sitting there and listening to this guy talk, and I thought, oh my God, if I ever got a really good job, and I used every amount of money I made to make these amends, I'm not going to live long enough to pay all that stuff back. It was too big. And then there were some people I owed amends to that just terrified me. I thought, man, they're going to take a baseball bat to me, man. They're going to do me in. And I couldn't imagine it. But my experience as a newcomer without an infusion of grace in my life, looking at the 12 steps, I hadn't worked the first 8 yet. And so I had no grace in my life to facilitate 9. And I was very much like a kid in about the 2nd grade looking at the exams he must pass in order to graduate from high school and becoming so overwhelmed that he wants to quit school because he looks at those tests and thinks, I don't even understand the questions. I'll never be And yet, if he goes to school every day and does his homework assignments, by the time he gets to the back end of the 12th grade, he has in place within him everything that he didn't have it back then that he needs now to pass those tests. And that's exactly how grace works in our lives. It's a principle of synchronicity that the power behind us will always be greater than the obstacles before us, regardless. And as you move through these steps and what happens and stuff comes up and you just start making the payments. One of the very difficult was to my mother and father. I had a lot of difficulty. The first scary one was I had to turn myself into the courts in Pennsylvania, and I was going to do 2 years in prison. And it scared the crap out of me. And I did it, and to my amazement, they transferred my case to Nevada because I split, and I was supposed to be on the hook for 2 years. I didn't have to do the 2 years. And then people in AA started asking me questions about my mother and father, and I told them, I said, well, I haven't talked to my mom and dad for a couple years. And you know what they said? They instead of saying, well, that's a shame, they said, oh, so you need to make amends to your parents. Well, no, it's not about that. They won't have anything to do with me. And they kept saying, well, you need to make amends to your parents. And I said, no, it's not about that. It's too late for that. I've hurt them too deeply. I robbed them so much. I broke their hearts. I stole so much from my father. He became friends with the guy who owned the pawn shop in the town we lived in from buying his own crap back. One of the worst things I did to my mother and father is I kept getting up on my feet again and get their hopes up, and then I just dashed them one more time. The last couple years, they would not take my phone calls. I was not welcome in their house. They would not give me a dime, even if I had to sit in jail. They would not help me at all. They didn't care. It was as if I was dead. And I found out from my sister that even though they cut me out of their lives physically, they couldn't cut me out of their heart, evidently, because my mother was seeing a therapist and taking medication, and my father slept 15 hours a day. And they were recluses in their own house. They had at one time been very social. At one time they were involved in a lot of charitable organizations in the country club and different things in the community. And the last few years they just stayed at home, and they wouldn't have to go out and have anything to do with anybody because they were just tired of answering the questions about me. Because I was notorious in that community. I was in and out of jail. I was the junkie wino that was always arrested. I was in the newspapers a lot. I was an embarrassment to my family. And so when I get sober and you guys tell me I got to make amends to my parents, you see, you don't understand. It's too late. Maybe a couple years ago, before I sold my mother's silver, maybe a couple years ago when my dad confronted me about some stuff he found in the house, and I freaked out and smashed a chair over the countertop at him, and it scared him. Is that his son did something that could have killed him? Scared him. Maybe then, before I did that, I could have made amends, but it was too late now. And you guys would listen to me, those big serenity smiles, and just nod your head and then say something as if you didn't hear a word I just said. The first thing he told me to do, he said, we want you to start calling your mom. I said, listen, they won't accept my calls. The guy said something that was unbelievable to me. He said, don't call collect. I must have looked like a deer in the headlights. I mean, I was so selfish and so self-centered and so full of myself with a sense of entitlement that I'm sad to tell you, it would never have occurred to me not to call collect. I remember the first call. God, I didn't want to call because I knew they were going to hang up on me. My mother answers the phone, and when she heard my voice, she got very anxious. She said, what do you want? And then she got a little panicky. She said, oh my God, you're not back in Pennsylvania again. I said, no, Mom, I'm in Nevada. She says, you're in Nevada? Well, the operator didn't ask me to pay for the call. I said, no, Mom, I paid for the call. Her voice shrieked. It went up an octave. She went, you paid for the call? She couldn't believe it, right? And they told me to start sending her cards, and my dad cards and letters. And I remember and never to miss a Father's Day, a Mother's Day, their anniversary, Christmas, birthdays. I always had to, even though I had these pitiful minimum wage jobs, I had to get them something. I remember the first Christmas. It was so pathetic to me. I don't have much, you know. I'm struggling paycheck to paycheck. I was able to get my dad this pathetic necktie. It was like $8.95 or something. It was just pathetic. If I would have given my dad a new Bentley in a beach house somewhere, it wouldn't have even scratched the surface for how far behind I am with my dad. All the years of him bailing me out of jail and paying my fines and giving me rent money and fixing my car and on and on and on and on. I was just a vacuum taker. And all I can do for Christmas is give him a necktie. And I didn't want to do it, but people in AA made me do it. And I sent him the necktie. And the next time I called after he received that necktie, it was the first time he ever got on the phone. I'd only been talking to my mom. And it was very, I mean, he wasn't warm, but he got on the phone and he almost stuttered the words out, "Thank you." And I got the necktie, and that's very nice, thank you. And he was afraid, and then the wall went back up again. Because when you break someone's heart over and over and over again, boy, they don't start to trust you quick, I'm telling you. And they shouldn't. For my mother and father to easily accept me back and trust me, there would have had to have been something wrong with them. So they were very cautious and very skeptical. And I was a year sober, and they flew out to Nevada, and I spent a lot of time with them, and they got to see me in AA, and they got to meet my sponsor, and some of the guys I sponsored, and some of the people in my home group. And I was instructed to sit down with my dad to put on paper, to the best of my recollection, every time he'd loaned me money and everything I owed my dad. And it was a considerable amount of money. And to figure out a payment plan, to make payments to the best of my ability. And then I was supposed to present this to him and ask him if I've missed anything, if there's anything I don't have down there, and then start the payment plan. And it was going to be a 12-and-a-half-year payment plan. When you're a year sober, 12-and-a-half years of payments is a lifetime. I mean, it just seemed hopeless. But you guys told me that I'd sold my integrity a nickel and a dime at a time. I'm going to buy it back a nickel and a dime at a time, and I'd have to make payments. And I don't want to make payments. I want to hit the lottery and give the grandiose, egocentric gesture, with an attaboy. They said, you're going to make these pathetic little payments. And I went to my dad, and I showed him what I had on paper, and I told him what I wanted to do. And I remember he said to my mom, he grabbed my mom's hand, and he said to my mom and me both out loud, and I think it's almost like they must have talked about this. I don't know if they did or not. But he said, Rob, he said, we don't want you to pay back the money. He said, this is the first time in years we had any hope you're going to be okay. Just keep doing this AA thing and forget about the money. We're just so glad you're sober. And man, I was lit up. I mean, I just got out of 12-and-a-half years of payments. I hit the recovery lottery here, man. And I'm on my way to my sponsor's office to tell him the good news. And, fantasizing about other people I owed money to. I wonder if they'd see the light like my parents did. And I'm just excited. I like this. This is good, man. I walk into my sponsor's office, tell him the good news. Told him my dad said, and he said to me, it doesn't matter what your dad said. That's your debt. That's your amends. This is your recovery. This is your integrity. You have to find a way to make that right. And I'll tell you, there are just times when you know you have the wrong sponsor. And I said, well, if I send him a little check, he won't even cash it. And he said something. I said, what am I supposed to do? And he said something he used to say until the day he died. Intermittently, he'd always say, I don't know, but a way will be shown. I don't even know what he means. I do today. I was working as a cashier in a store, and my dad saved and collected silver coins and war nickels and wheat pennies and silver certificates and gold certificates. And in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, there's a lot of that stuff in circulation. It was come through my register every day. I made a deal with my boss, and I started buying it. And as I started down the road of amends to my dad and also other people, it was almost as if I got lucky financially. And I started getting raises and bonuses. And what should have taken 12-and-a-half years, I accumulated at face value the whole total amount of the debt in about a little over 4 years, I think. And the mother of my daughter and I, we weren't married yet. We drove back to Pennsylvania, and I took these bags of silver quarters and $50 and dimes, and I had a shoebox full of $100 and silver gold certificates and a whole bunch of silver certificates that I had accumulated over the course of a couple of years, and I took them back and I gave them to my dad, and it blew his mind. And he never expected it, and I changed our relationship. It seemed like to me, and I'm suspect of my own perception, but it seemed like at that moment I became a man in my dad's eyes. Now, prior to me giving him that money, he loved me. I know that. He forgave me. I know that. But I never really felt it inside because I was not even with him. And when and the next year of my life was the sweetest thing I ever had with my father. And he died about a year later. And I tell you, I got to mourn him, and I miss him to this day. But his spirit is right within me now. I mean, there's no ghosts of I wish I would have or I wish I hadn't. Everything was put to rest. And I am so grateful for that. I tell you, I think the spirit of my father is alive within me. I've felt him in the room a couple occasions. I've heard his voice. When my daughter was born, I was in the room, and I held her, cut her umbilical cord, gave her first bath. I felt my dad in that room. When I sold my company 12 years ago, and I got the first 7-figure check, I swear to God, I heard my dad's voice say, "Rob, you done good." That sounds crazy, like I've been smoking something, but I heard my dad's voice say, "Rob, you done good." And me and my dad are good. His memory is sweet within me. I miss him. I'd give just about anything to have an hour with him. Maybe I will one day. And that's all as a result of this amends process. And I'll say one thing. There's a lot of resentments that will not go away, and they will reoccur, and you will reinforce them until you make amends. Because if I've hurt you and I haven't made it right, then my ego is vested in having a judgment against you, and I will not be free of that position towards you until I make things right between me and you. I think step 9 is where we get to circumvent our own karma. I think there's something in me that's destined to get even. And I'm either going to get even with you by making it right and paying you back, or I'm going to get even with me. The word karma comes from the Hindi, and its literal translation into the English is the word doing. In other words, you've hurt a bunch of people over here, you owe a lot of money over here, and over there you have bad luck, and financially you're a disaster, and you think it's bad luck. Karma says, no, it's your doing. Unconsciously, you've positioned yourself not to catch God's grace, but to catch the problems. Because I'm positioning myself to get what I secretly think I deserve. Right? And so I think this is where we really start to change the course of our life. In step 8 and 9, I think it's the end game of a lot of what we do here, is to go out and repair the damage that we've done. It's tough. It's a scary proposition. And the only thing that allows guys like me to do it is some measure of trust in the beginning. And I'll tell you what I discovered. The more I take the actions of trusting God, trust is like a muscle. The more you walk through the fear and act like someone who trusts God by facing this stuff, it's like strengthening the muscle. The muscle gets stronger. Mari.
Thank you. We've had a long day today, and I hope you've enjoyed the day. And I have to be out of here at 5 o'clock on the button because someone's taken me back to the hotel, and then I have to go to another group. So I'll just be very short. I'll tell you the most, what amends have done for me is they've enabled me to go anywhere and not be afraid. Not be afraid I'm going to be confronted by the things that are still there in the past. They have given me a freedom of movement. You know, my favorite image in my life is of Braveheart running through the Highlands shouting freedom. You know, and I always wanted that kind of freedom. And I never thought I would have it because I was so ashamed and never thought, and also had a lot of resentments. And I've dealt with the resentments in 6 and 7, and now I am ready because for some reason, something magical happens. When you deal with those defects of character, you're able to go out. And the most important amends I had to make, my mother and dad were both dead when I got sober. And both of them, I felt I had contributed to their death. When I was in Jamaica, the time I had made the aborted trip, and I called my mother, I didn't know she was dying of ovarian cancer. And she was to be dead on my birthday very shortly afterwards. My father, when I was missing in action and had ended up in the street and my children had been taken away, my father apparently woke up one morning at almost 3 in the morning and said to my mother, I don't know where my lassie is and I don't know where my grandchildren are and I'm having trouble and I'm going to go for a walk. And he went for a walk and dropped dead in the street. At the same time, I was living on the street. And these are the legacies that I had to carry that I could never have got sober, not having dealt. And I didn't know how to deal with them. So I got something very simple. My sponsor told me to write to my father a letter and to put down everything in there that I wanted to say to him in the amends, and one to my mother, and put them in 2 separate envelopes with airmail stickers and stamps, and address one to Mrs. Anne Gallagher, Care of the Angels, Glasgow, Scotland, and do the same for the other one, and post them. And I can imagine a postman in Scotland saying, another alcoholic making amends. And you know, it helped, but my sponsor also said, you will get a chance. Clancy used to tell me I should take old people across the road whether they want to go or not. But what happened, because, you know, in God's world, in God's economy, eventually God is the one that holds the sheet, the balance sheet. And when my husband had that stroke and was unable to talk and everything else, I was able to take him home and look after him. And I got a chance to do something of value for another human being that I was never able to do because I couldn't help my parents when they were sick. The ones with my children are ongoing to this day. And the family afterwards, it said that these amends, they may take a lifetime. And I truly believe that. You know, I made all the initial amends with my children, but it's how I'm living today that matters. Today. I am now in today. How am I treating my loved ones today? Am I lying to them? Am I being dishonest? Am I not doing the best that I can do? Am I unnecessarily burdening them with life? Am I unnecessarily burdening them with the problems I have and I have created? This is how I make amends on a daily basis. I make sure that none of my stuff touches my children. So this is an ongoing thing. I don't know when I'm amended in the eyes of God. I will know when I take my last breath. But as far as I can tell, I am current. You know, I told you about that one where I phoned up the man and said to him, if I hadn't been drunk, I wouldn't have gone to bed with you. What I meant there was, if I had not been drinking, I would not have manipulated you to get the money by going to bed. That I didn't have the language then. And so what I had to do eventually was because I wanted to call all my husbands the minute I was sober. And they were not receptive. You know, I'm always amazed. I see these people that have wonderful relationships with their exes. I don't. But I've taken the action. But, you know, sometimes it will, really the amends, I'm wanting to help them, but it's so that I will be free. So that I can go on to be of ultimate use. So that I can live with some degree and comfort without having these things hanging over me. There was one of the financial amends I had to make was to a store. It was one of the big stores in Oxford Street in London. When I was in London, and I used to have on my Airways uniform, so I looked good, but I would go in and take a dress a week. And sometimes I'd take my friends and see what they wanted. And this was a long, long time ago, so they didn't have these beepers, you know. So I guess they thought that I just looked good, and of course, if I was with this airline, I couldn't be a thief. So when I was talking to my sponsor about that, I said, how am I going to make amends to that store? They're not even there anymore. She said, well, what I want you to do is to start sending money for the poor people. And sending clothes and sending donations. And that was a way I could do that. So somebody benefited, you know, because we couldn't see a way to do the other one. I'll finish with telling you one that I had to take. No, I'm not going to go there. All right. I'll just tell you that something came up recently, and I discussed it with my sponsor, and it was something that happened in another country. And I discussed it with my sponsor, and this was about 3 months ago. And he said to me, no, I don't really think that it would do any good if you were locked up. At this stage, after all those years. And I really just don't think that we should do anything here. But the fact is, I was ready to do something. It was the one I had hanging over that I thought might eventually affect my life. So I had to take his counsel, because I didn't know what to do about it. And if he said he's okay with it, then I am okay with it too. And God will let me know if there's anything more. So I've had a great day. I hope you have too, and thank you so much for being here. Good job. Really? Yeah. That was it.
Hey, we'll see everybody back at 9, and
Is it you or somebody else that had gotten arrested for handing a pretty girl money? Wasn't sure. All right, okay. I'm Bob Darrell. I'm an alcoholic. You know, it really is a long and sometimes it seems endless period of reconstruction ahead. And for some of us, it takes years to right things that damage we did to people who cared about us, especially, and to the damage we did to our own integrity. Most of us come here, we hate ourselves, and rightly so. I mean, I used to have therapists try to talk me out of hating myself. Well, I had a that's ridiculous, because if you would have, I would have hated anyone else that did the things I did too. It was the only way to, as Chamberlain used to say, is to rub away the wreckage, or to change who you are is by your actions. And not that we ever get perfect, but so the amends took a long time. Paying people back took a long time. I was sitting around with a group of guys one time. They were all sober a fair amount of time. And we were all talking about how long did it take you before you paid back every amends of the people you could find. And I think the average at the table was probably a little over 7 years. Some people it was a lot longer. Some people it was a little shorter. But it takes a while. And it's the transformation that comes from that is really remarkable. And facing all those people, we are people who have a hard time admitting we were wrong. Oh my God, I've had people in AA attempt to their sponsor told me that they had to make an amends to me, so they come to me and here's an alcoholic's typical amends. Well, I might have been wrong, but if you wouldn't have done what you did, right? I'm like the guy who goes to the courtroom and stands up in front of the judge and says, because my attorney's there, Guilty, Your Honor, but with an explanation, right? And I had and this is going to tie into 10. I had a guy named Dale who probably 30 years ago, he was a real servant in AA. He was a little bit grumpy guy, but I liked him. He liked me because I did a lot of H&I work, and he did a lot of that, and he respected people who did that, even though he was kind of a grumpy guy. But he got in my face one day, and he said to me, he says, "Kid, I'm going to tell you a couple things that if you buy it, it's going to save you a lot of pain, a lot of grief in your recovery." He said, "I want you to know that if you're explaining something, if you're justifying something, if you're defending something or rationalizing something, kid, I want you to know you're wrong. Because you never have to explain, justify, or rationalize what's right." And I'll tell you something, I've held on to that for probably the 30 years since he told me that, and I've not found an exception. The minute the committee comes on with the defensive posturing and explaining it, telling myself the story of how I'm right and you're wrong, I'm back into ego stuff again. It's automatic. So I watch for that stuff. And that brings us to step 10. Coming into the part on step 10, it talks about something that it mentions a couple times in our literature. It says, "We have entered the world of the Spirit." What does that mean? Well, later it's going to talk about that certain factors will stay in place in my life contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. What happens I think most of us, we get a taste of something here. We get a taste of freedom of the Spirit. You know, after all the stuff that had been haunting you, and all that stuff or maybe not all of it, but a lot of it's been chipped away, there's an uplift that happens in a feeling of freedom that's pretty cool. All of a sudden, guys like me can start like goofing on themselves and laughing at themselves because I'm not defending myself. When you're defending yourself and you're running the universe, it's a serious business. And so I'm starting to get a new freedom and a new happiness, and I'm starting to get lit up. I'm starting to feel useful. I'm connected now. That painful feeling of separation as Bill, I love what Bill says in the 12 by 12. He calls it anxious apartness has dissolved away, and now I feel a sense of community. I'm sponsoring guys. I've made amends. A lot of the people that I had hated or hated me, they don't feel that way anymore. I'm starting to take my rightful place as one of God's kids. And I'd always had that. It's funny how your inheritance is always there, but you can't claim it until you clear away the stuff that's blocking you from claiming your inheritance. And my inheritance is to be one of God's kids. Not better than, not less than, just one of the herd. And that's a pretty nice thing for a guy who suffered the anxious apartness that Wilson talks about, the loneliness. I remember on my last drunk, as I was trying to get up enough courage to kill myself, I remember the loneliness. And I'd suffered from that for years. I just lost somewhere. And so our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And I have to do that. And it's the beginning of this, of growing and understanding for me really started when I did the 4th step out of the book, and I got into this was our course. And the book says I must make these realizations, how even though I don't like what the person did that I resent, and even though I didn't like how it affected me, that I had to realize how they were perhaps like me, spiritually sick. So I had to come off my high horse of judgment and come right down to humanity level and see myself in that person and see that they're driven by the same fears, the same pain, because hurt people will hurt people, that they got the same stuff going on inside of them that had on in me. And it's the beginning, it's like a veil that lifts, and all of a sudden you look at the person differently. I was just talking with a friend of mine before the meeting. All of a sudden, you kind of see yourself in those people. And so the book's implying that I have to grow in this. It's not that what I did in the 4 steps, great, but I got to keep moving forward because life's going to throw some more stuff at me. And people are going to do things that are going to hurt my feeling and all this other kind of stuff. And I have to continue to try to grow in understanding, to see. I'm a judgmental idiot, right? Here's the problem. It's not that I'm judgmental. I only judge enough to gratify the ego. If I really judged properly, if I judged like God judged, if I perceived like God perceived, I would see past the annoyance and past the things that my ego wants to grab onto to puff itself up, and I would see the truth. And the truth is that you're not a jerk. You're me on a bad day is what you are. And then the effectiveness comes in as I understand that this is not an opportunity to be aggravated. This is an opportunity to be helpful. I see this a lot. I travel a lot. And airports are, I've become a pretty good traveler. I almost hate to say that because I don't want to jinx it. But I become, for the most part, pretty good. I understand the principle that last-minute, unexplained changing in travel plans are actually dancing lessons from God. That it's not I don't have to get aggravated and take it out on the ticket clerk or whatever. But people do, and I'm in airports all the time when flights are delayed and are canceled. Things happen. And boy, people get outside their comfort zone and they're traveling and fear, they get very afraid and angry, and they'll take it out on people who have no control over this situation, ticket clerks. And every once in a while, if I'm awake, and I be honest with you, I'm not awake as much as I'd like to be. I miss a lot of stuff. But if I'm awake, what I see often is an opportunity to be helpful. That this person who's really aggravated just needs somebody to come and share with them their own frustrations, as we do in AA. It's the same thing we do with AA. We don't try to tell the new person what to do. We tell them about ourselves. And I've had that experience where I've gone up to people that are angst about travel delays, and I just start talking about me. Just say, boy, it's frustrating when you know, I get scared sometimes. I'm going to miss my flight, and then what's going to happen? I don't know what to do. And they just look at you like, yeah, right. And then I say things like, but I got to keep reminding myself, everything always works out. They look at you and they go, yeah. Because they knew that. They kind of knew that already. They just had forgot. The emotion had pulled them away from the reality. I did it one time with a ticket agent with American, and I was in line because we had to get all the flight was all messed up, and everybody had to get rerouted and all this stuff, and I'm watching people give her a hard time, and one guy right in front of me just went off on her, and he was brutal. He was angry, and I get up to her and I just said, you know, I really appreciate how you're handling this under fire. You're a really good example. And I said, you know, a lot of people when they travel and their flights are changed or canceled, they get afraid. And you know how, and I know, God, there have been times in my life I've acted really badly when I'm afraid. And she looks at me like, yeah. See, she knew that. She'd been standing at that ticket counter for years. She just, in the wash of emotion, had forgotten it and reacted to her. And it was like, yeah, you know, she got it. She's not, the poor guy's scared. And then she put me in first class, which was nice. It's my happy ending. Always come back to being selfish, doesn't it? It's like my default position. It's my default position, you know? So what do we do? Well, the book is going to use a word here, uses it over and over again, continue, continue, continue. And the reason I have to continue to watch for these manifestations of ego and self is because it's the ego keeps coming back. It's relentless. It's relentless. I've had, maybe some of you have had this experience of maybe you're at a meeting, your home group, and you're talking with a bunch of guys before the meeting, or maybe you went out to dinner with a bunch of guys and you feel connected and plugged in and sort of have a love in your heart, and you're feeling really very cool. Walk into your meeting and it's like this key turns in my head. And all of a sudden I just start noticing things about people. Like you left your phone on, didn't you? You didn't hear the announcement. You didn't put any money in the basket. I think you had about 4 cups of coffee. And you just start noticing. And the guy who was one with becomes one apart from. And that's the ego is the source of the separation, right? And I separate myself from God and from you through my judgments, because that's what the ego does. It does it very well. And so the book says I got to continue to watch for selfishness when I make it all about me and my way. How Bob thinks you should act. My way. Well, I got to continue to see. It's hard to watch for that sometimes because you don't see it, because it's not my way. It's the right way. You know what I mean? It's right. So it's very. So some of this stuff is devious. I got to watch for dishonesty. I do this hideous thing. And it's funny, I've done it most of my life, and a lot of the times I don't think it's dishonest, and yet it is. Because what I do is I just allow myself a little bit of literary license with reality. I'm not going to outward lie, but I want to tweak it a little bit to make me look a little better, and you just a little bit, just a tiny, because you got to tell it. You got to tell the truth the right way. Right. I remember the first time when I got in Clancy, my first sponsor and I became so close. He loved me, and he really did. I loved me. He was like my dad, and so I started also talking to Clancy. And the first time I ever called him up with a problem, it's like I started telling him about it, and he yelled at me over the phone, "Why don't you call me back when you want to tell me what's going on and stop feeding me a lot of BS?" And he hung up on me. I was like, I was sober a long time. I sponsored guys. I had service position. You can't talk to me that way, right? But he was right. I didn't want to just tell him what's going on. I was putting him together like a car salesman will try to put you together, right? I wanted to explain it to him in such a way that he'd see it my way. And I guess from sponsoring hundreds of people for 50-some years, he just has developed this BS meter that's just like really good. And it was just, I couldn't even, he does that to me sometimes. He doesn't let me finish the sentence, which is a shame, because I think if I finished the sentence, maybe he'd be closer to seeing it my way. No. But, so my dishonesty is sneaky sometimes, as I tell myself stories about reality. And resentment. Is it a resentment if you're right? Is it a resentment if they're really wrong? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And fear. I think I must like fear. I sure like to worry sometimes. You just get something that's not even a problem, and I just want to finger it in my mind for a while, just kind of play with it. And I usually play with it until it's the end of the world, I take it to that, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been convinced I have terminal illnesses and stuff, I don't. I just take a headache or a acre of pain, just take it into, into the deal, into the abyss. So what happens to me is that, I'm supposed to do this in the moment, right now. Because this is inventories right now. This is 10th step. Now, in the 11th step, not to be confused with the 10th step, has a nightly examination that's actually part of step 11, but this is what they're talking about here is not to let it build up to the end of the day. This is right now, and here's the kind of guy I am. I wish I did better with this, but I get real busy in my life, and instead of pausing when I'm agitated and look to see where I've been selfish, dishonest, resentful, or afraid, to look where I've become egocentric again and then take care of this, process this the way AA teaches me. Instead of doing that, I'm so busy, I roll over it to the next thing on my plate. And I do that a lot. And then what happens is if I do that, I get weird. And hopefully I catch it at night when I do the 11th step. But sometimes even then I don't catch it. Sometimes at night I'm just tired and I just want to go to sleep, so I don't want to look too close, And if you do that, what happens to guys like me is crap builds up and I start getting weird and I start becoming more and more judgmental and more right. And what I really is I'm becoming more and more in the bondage of self. And then every few years I end up doing a massive house cleaning again. I don't know, I don't argue with people that say you just work the first 9 steps. I go back and do a massive house cleaning, whether you want to call it an in-depth 10th step or going back through the steps. Inventory by any other name still uncovers stuff that stinks, it's just the way it is, whatever you call it. But I know if you're like me, you're going to have to go back and clean house intermittently. I know ideally, if I could do it day by day, I probably would never have to go back and do major house cleaning, but I also know the truth is I leak, and I'm not as diligent about this as I could be, and I'm just not. Don't make me a bad guy, kind of makes me pretty average here, I think, from the guys I've talked to. So how do you know? So Wilson, 15 years later, 13 years later, came up with a litmus test, I guess. How do you know when you have rolled over stuff? How do you know when you have work to do and you don't think you have work to do? How do you know where you're out of line and you got some stuff to take care of? How do you know? And he said in step 10, he says it's a spiritual axiom. That means it's something that's true under all conditions. He said it's a spiritual axiom that when I'm disturbed at all, even if it's their fault, when I'm disturbed at all, no matter what the cause, that there is something wrong with me. So if I and we all know what it feels like to be disturbed, and yet how often I'm disturbed and I just roll over it or I just accept it. Or Silkworth says something in the doctor's opinion that's haunted me throughout my recovery. He says to us, our alcoholic life seems the only normal one, what that means is I am very capable of adjusting to neurosis and angst and just feeling kind of not that great as if it's normal. I have that ability. I have an old friend I've known since he got sober. He's just angst all the time. And he's adjusted to it. Matter of fact, he can't imagine life I don't think he can imagine life where he's not angry at something. I don't know. I wouldn't want to be that way. But some people, we are capable of adjusting to stuff. We just are. It doesn't make us bad people. Because You know, I love that old adage that we are not punished for our sins, but for God's sakes, we're punished by them. So anytime I miss the mark, and that's what sin, if sin comes from archery, anytime I miss the mark, miss the target, God doesn't punish me for missing the target. I punish myself, right? I'm the guy, I live with the fact that I'm out of line. And that's really true. And I think what happens to a lot of us is that we start to taste this newfound freedom and this new happiness. And once you start to taste it and you realize it's there and it's possible, that you start to yearn for that. And you don't want to compromise anymore. And I'll tell you, that took me over 20 years here, well over 20 years, before I got to a place where I just valued my spiritual condition above everything else. There is not, I don't care what you do, how out of line it is. If you rip me off for some money, it's just part of life. There's nothing worth holding on to make myself sick inside. That there's no point I have to make. There's nothing worth this. Because if it ain't right in here, it ain't right. I'm not right. And I like comfort. I drank whiskey to feel comfortable. And I do AA today to be comfortable. That's all. So what do? There's 5 things in step 10. First thing is we watch. We watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, or fear. Number 1. Second direction, we ask. We ask God at once to remove them, which is usually about 3 days later. We ask God at once to remove them. Third thing is we discuss them with someone immediately. That's usually 3 days later also. And 4, we make amends quickly. That's usually 3 months later, if we've harmed anyone. And then the 5th thing is the new default position that AA is trying to install in me. And we resolutely turn our attention to someone we can help. It's remarkable how often the book just keeps taking us back to someone we can help. And I think my natural default position is to go back to me. Go back to me and my stuff. And they're trying to take a self-centered, self-obsessed person and by repetitive action start to move me a little bit towards other-centeredness. And I got a bungee cord attached to self, and I keep going back to self, so I got to keep turning, and there's action there, turning my attention to someone I can help. Because it doesn't turn that way naturally for me. I'm a selfish and self-centered person by nature. And yet a lot of us, if from objective outward observation, would appear to be very altruistic and very other-centered in our actions and in our service. And it looks that we're that way, but in truth, we act that way, but in truth, we all know. We all know how selfish we can be, how self-obsessed, self-concerned, self-focused. So it's really a transformational thing that a selfish, self-centered guy like me could live a life that demonstrates altruism in spite of my basic nature. And there's a lot of freedom in this. In English class, when I was growing up in school, we read a book called Milton's Paradise Lost. And there was a part in there, it's become kind of famous, and there's a part in there where Lucifer has cast himself out of heaven through his own self-will. And he's shaking his fist at God, the angels in heaven, and he's proclaiming, I would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. And every alcoholic that's like me has had the experience that when you're reigning, feels like hell. And when you're serving, it feels like heaven. And yet I'm more prone to reign than I am to serve. Without Alcoholics Anonymous and sponsorship and commitments and all this stuff, I would be the reigner rather than the server. And I aspire to be the server because I like myself a lot, and I like you, and I like the world, and I'm closer to God, and I'm more one with when I'm serving than I've ever been when I'm reigning. When I'm reigning, I'm apart from running the universe. And so we aspire to this new default position of other-centeredness, of being a servant. Isn't that what I said in this third step prayer? I talking to God about this, ask him to relieve me of this bondage of self. And if he would take away these difficulties with this, do it so that victory over them would bear witness to those I would help. That I'm signing up here for something. I'm signing up for a primary number one purpose greater than myself, and that's to help other alcoholics. We help other people too. But I am divinely crafted by my own misery and failure to be uniquely useful to people like me who have this malady of their spirit, this extreme self-centeredness. I can be very useful with guys like that because they're like me. I can talk to a knucklehead like me like no one else can talk to that knucklehead because he's me, right? A psychiatrist who's not a knucklehead doesn't know how to talk to another knucklehead, right? Right. But I can talk to one because I am one. And I can go inside myself and to a place where I understand you and be useful and effective. And that's what we're really trying to do, is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. Mari, take me off the hook.
My name is Mari. I'm an alcoholic. So it tells us in step 9 that the spiritual life is not a theory and that we have to live it. And it also goes on and says in the promises that we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. The amazing thing for me in coming to step 10 is that I don't want to hurt anybody anymore. Is that I don't want to create any more things that are going to cause problems. The amazing thing for me is that I am going to start monitoring what I say to people to find out how it will affect them. That I am becoming otherly conscious and God conscious rather than Mari conscious. Rather than the claustrophobic suffocation of Mari. They shut out all else. You know, I used to be able to take your inventory on speculation.
Yeah.
You know, just on spec, you know. And I didn't even have to know you, you know. Because as long as I was taking the inventory of the world, I didn't have to be looking at me. But you see, another strange, incredible thing has happened in this journey through the first 9 steps, is that the transformation that has occurred seems to be very deep. It is so deep that there doesn't seem to be a way to go back from here without a lot of guilt and pain and suffering. You are unable to live the life you used to live, whether or not you're sober. If you've gone this far, you've got to continue. You know, the spiritual life becomes as sharp as the edge of a razor. It gets broad in some areas, but it gets very, very narrow with regards to how we can live our lives. One of my biggest problems that I've had to make amends for is George Bernard Shaw said once that the great problem with communication is the illusion it has taken place. You know, I don't know if you've noticed in the rooms that sometimes people will say something and you know you didn't say that. And sometimes I will hear things that the person didn't say because I'm not really listening. Because I already have some kind of a preset notion about how I feel about this person. So whatever they are saying, then I will take it and turn it around and use it to get a little annoyed. Now, I don't do a lot of that anymore. I'm so grateful. I haven't had a lot of amends to make recently. Oh, what I will tell you is this. The 10th step is a current step. But if you remember, when I told you about that problem with my boss, when I lost my temper and took her inventory, and my sponsor told me I had to go back in and make amends. Well, after I did that, my sponsor and I sat down and we looked at this because of how strong it had been and from where it had come from. And we realized it didn't have a lot to do with the woman I was working for. And my sponsor felt that this is something I would have to do a 4th and 5th on. Because it was something that was so deep, it would just be kind of putting a Band-Aid on it to just do a 10th step on it again. Because my sponsor said to me at the time, sometimes what happens is after many years of sober living, a situation will occur which incites an inappropriate amount of rage or an inappropriate response, which means that it has touched something that had its genesis in something that happened a long, long time ago. And that you probably haven't realized the depth and import of that. So we did. We did a 4th and 5th on that rage and that feeling I had. And what we discovered was it wasn't a situation that had happened a long, long time ago. Real or imagined, it was a situation that I had felt something and it had made me feel powerless. And what had happened with that woman is she was making me feel powerless. The situation we dealt with all these years ago, I was being controlled. She made me feel as if she was controlling me. She made me feel suffocated, and that's very sad. And I didn't even know. I didn't even know I hadn't covered that because it hadn't come up. So there you are. I think that when we are examining these things that happen on a daily basis and the interactions that we have with people, sometimes the response that incites has got absolutely nothing much to do with the situation that's going on. Now, I do hate to say this because, I have been very, very good. And I am a good girl in the rooms of AA mostly. If I have something to say to somebody, I will take them outside. And I'll never defile the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll never talk to another alcoholic with great anger. I refuse to do it. But what happened is, I had to make an amends in Chinese. I had to get an interpreter. What happened was, oh God, why do you make me do this? Okay. So what happened is this. In my building, the washers and dryers are downstairs. And we have a couple of lovely Chinese families live in that building. Couples. Lovely people. I had had a particularly harrowing day with sponsees. And I went downstairs and it was just me and this Chinese woman. And there was 8 dryers and they were all empty. So when I went down to put my washing in, I noticed that she had put her washing was still going around, but she had put her coins in the dryers. She had picked the dryers she wanted to have. Now, you're not supposed to use those till does she understand, or do I have to explain that to her? No, she doesn't speak very good English. So I tried to explain, you cannot put your money in the dryers until you have finished your washing, because somebody else might want them. And she just looked at me, and so I took the money out and I said, no, not for now. And she's showing me, gesturing, there's 8 empty dryers. Who cares? It's only you and me down here with 2 loads of washing. And I'm trying to explain the principle of the thing. You know, it's that fairness fairy coming out again that haunts me. So I took her money out of the machine to give it to her, and she started shouting at me in Chinese and running out screaming at me in Chinese. I have an idea what she was saying because it looked like that, you know. And then I thought, you know, this room was real quiet when I got in here. You know, it's one more time bringing me into a situation that's got absolutely nothing to do with me. Why didn't I just leave her alone? What is it? Because I think it's because of the reason we have to keep doing this step. There are times I cannot bear the inner turmoil of me. And when I cannot bear the inner turmoil of me, then I will look to project that turmoil on you. I want to create a little havoc in your life. Or else the world is not just running the way I want it to run. I will do anything. What I should have done before I went downstairs is, I won't get into it now, but I should examine what was going on with me and one of my sponsees. What was it in me that she triggered by her response? You see, pride. I am her sponsor, but I can become suffused with pride if she's not doing what I want. Or if she questions me. So what pride is and does is pride makes me very artificial. That I am no longer artificial to the extent of what I used to be before God gave me a chance to create a change of personality that is making me real. So I will go back into an old default state of being an artificial me. And that's not who I am anymore. The honesty will make me real. And the honesty is what I get when I sit down and look at how I behaved that day. So I will just tell you that what I did do was I went and got a Chinese lady who could speak, who was bilingual. And we went and I had her make amends for me. My pride made me want to learn a few quick words of Chinese just to have the right effect. But I thought, my God, you're even crossing countries and language now where you need to make amends. You know, it's... So, continuing to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. I have to do that because it's a funny thing. I can no longer